Hello, I'm Joshua Reynolds from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, here to tell you about an empirical measurement of two-factor authentication usability. This is work we did while I was an intern at the International Computer Science Institute with a lot of folks from UC Berkeley. We were supported by the National Science Foundation, by State Farm, and the Center for Long-Term Cybersecurity at UC Berkeley. Two-factor authentication is growing in popularity. 96% of executives surveyed in 2019 predict expanding their use of two-factor authentication. Cisco showed their valuation of this market when they acquired in 2018 the two-factor authentication company Duo Security for $2.35 billion. As all of these organizations are implementing for the first time and expanding their use of two-factor authentication, they need to know what will the organizational impacts to their process be of applying two-factor authentication, and how will the design decisions that they make affect the impact they have on their organization. Specifically, we wondered how much time does two-factor authentication consume across all the employees of an organization? What are the greatest causes of error? What are the impact of these errors? And which errors become a burden to tech support? How quickly can new users learn the system? And are some users burdened unequally with the system? We have time today to talk about the first four of these questions. To answer our questions, we partnered with the identity teams at the University of Illinois and UC Berkeley. The University of Illinois provided us with 9 months of data comprising 6.2 million two-factor authentication ceremony logs, as well as 6.7 thousand support tickets and some aggregate demographic information. Berkeley did not have support tickets or demographics, but what they did have was a larger user base. At Berkeley, as opposed to Illinois, all students, including undergraduates, must use two-factor authentication. And in a period of 12 months, they were able to provide us with 31.3 million logs of two-factor authentication ceremonies. And the first question we wanted to answer was how much time is being spent in two-factor authentication ceremonies across these organizations. And to do this, we leveraged work measuring the time taken in two-factor authentication ceremonies done by both Lang et al. And Rees et al. And you can find citations to those works in the paper. By multiplying their timing data with our logs, we estimate that at the University of Illinois, UIUC, people spend 30,000 people hours per year on two-factor authentication. That's 30,000 hours spent copying codes over, touching push notifications, answering the phone. That works out to about 23 minutes per year per user. And at UC Berkeley, again with a larger user base, 37.4 thousand people hours per year. 15.6 minutes per year per user is what that works out to, which you'll notice is a little bit smaller than the University of Illinois. And we'll talk about why that is in a little bit. But first, I want to show you the distribution of this time, because those were average times I was just showing you. And there's, in fact, a wider distribution depending on how well each user is able to interact with the system and how often they need to log in. But what we can see is across the board, we're looking at something on the order of tens of minutes per year per user to require two-factor authentication as a part of the ordinary workflow at this organization. The University of Illinois and UC Berkeley made different decisions on how they would try to reduce user burden. The University of Illinois has long web session timeouts. You might need to log in once or twice per day per service. This means that they log in overall 60% fewer times per user per day than your average user at UC Berkeley. However, at UC Berkeley, where the web session timeouts are shorter, they allow users to opt into a Remember Me setting, which allows them to waive two-factor authentication on subsequent logins. This means that overall 70% of their two-factor authentication logins are waived. And so we see examples of two powerful tools here: the length of session timeouts and the length of remember me to decrease the user burden. And so I encourage organizations to take a look at their threat model and see which of these they might be able to take advantage of to decrease their user burden. Now, up till now, we've been talking about two-factor authentications that proceeded perfectly. But unfortunately, two-factor authentication seems to be very prone to error. We saw between 10 and 20% of two-factor authentication ceremonies failing. The most common reasons were human reasons, not technical failings of the vendor service. Cancellations, timeouts, and typing in invalid code. Cancellations and timeouts worked out to about 60% at both universities and indicate the user found themselves unable to continue the authentication after they did input their username and password. The second factors most likely to cause errors were phone calls and SMS, telephony-based two-factor authentication, as well as using recovery codes given by tech support or the automated account recovery system. At the University of Illinois, the most common reason to contact tech support that we could identify was enrolling a two-factor authentication device. And the second most common was when you've changed devices, re-enrolling or adding another device. Now, of all of the second factor choices, phone calls and SMS, again, telephony, caused the greatest burden to tech support. Another common problem was losing a device or finding it non-functional, and also problems with the automated account recovery system, or being unwilling to provide the necessary authentication over the phone to recover a two-factor authentication protected account. We wanted to understand what impact these errors, which were more common than we expected, what kind of impact these errors had on users' productivity. And so we defined a metric called error recovery time. Looking at our logs, we marked the first time a user failed, and we measured the time from that point until they succeeded in logging in, even if they failed several times along the way, to measure how long it took them to succeed at what they were originally trying to do. And I'm going to show you a distribution of how long these recovery times were. And the first thing I want to notice is the bottom left corner. This is a good number of people, perhaps half. Half the time they run into some error and they're able to fix their problem within 1 or 2 minutes. And this is unfortunate, this error rate is this high, but it's not what I think is the most concerning. But the most concerning part of this graph is the upper right. This is where we see a group of people who, after they have failed to authenticate, they don't go on to fix their problem until tens of minutes or hours or weeks later. And this indicates perhaps the tasks they intended to do never got done or were pushed out further than they would have been. This is a red flag for possible productivity loss, and blocking the process entirely could lead to even more. And we have evidence here that it is. If you'd like to contact me about the paper, you can reach me at my Illinois email address here. And what would I like organizations to take away who want to implement what we've learned here? First, that two-factor authentication, as we've seen, is on the order of tens of minutes per year per user, which puts it in a reasonable equivalence class with other compliance requirements at large organizations. I encourage organizations to minimize their user burden by tuning the Remember Me and web session timeouts. Please avoid telephony-based two-factor authentication. It's tempting to use because everyone already knows how to receive a phone call, but incurs a lot of technical debt that ends up being passed along to the support team and to the users as they're dealing with the phone network and many different devices. I also hope that in the future we'll learn more about potential productivity impacts of two-factor authentication interrupting a workflow. And I hope this work in general allows organizations to be prepared for the impacts they face as they gain the extra security provided by two-factor authentication.